Hi class, how are you today? That's about one standard deviation away from what you normally say. The learning target for today is to understand and calculate standard deviation. 3. I understand and can calculate standard deviation. So, you can understand and calculate standard deviation. You understand what it means, and you can calculate it. 2. You can calculate or understand standard deviation, but not both. 1. You can calculate deviations from the mean. So, essentially, if you were a 2 in the last video. 0. You cannot calculate deviations from the mean. Let's get started. Alright, so before we go into calculating standard deviation, let's understand what it is. So, what is standard deviation? Standard deviation is a measure that is used to quantify the amount of variation of a set of data values. What that means is one standard deviation away from the mean is sort of like a margin of error sort of thing. How much the data usually deviates from the mean. How far most of the data goes away. And I like to show that using a graph like this. Don't worry about the percents. The percents aren't totally important right now. And I know most of the graphs we're working with are histograms and dot plots and box plots. But this is a curved graph. Specifically, it's a bell graph. So, with this, we can see here in this dark blue here, this line is the mean. So it's marked as 0 because that's 0 standard deviations away from the mean, or right at the mean. So this blue part here and this blue part here are each one standard deviation away from the mean. So most of the data in a completely symmetric graph, exactly 68.2% will be right here. But you can always say most of the data will be one standard deviation away from the mean. Now, of course, one standard deviation is both positive and negative. So, in the pun I used at the beginning of the video, one standard deviation away from the mean just means you're about over half, you're just at the end of average distance away from the mean, if you will. If you're any more than one standard deviation away, then you're dealing with less data. See, there's a lot less here. There's still a good amount, though. And the farther away you go, when you get to 3 standard deviations, you're dealing with even less data. So usually whenever you're looking at data, you want to look at the stuff that is one standard deviation away from the mean. That's where the real important stuff happens. Now, how do you calculate standard deviation? Like this. You guys can all do that, right? Just kidding. While that is the formula for standard deviation, I'm going to explain step by step how to actually calculate it. But we will be doing this. So I want you to take these numbers, there's 12 numbers here, and I want you to do what we did last class and find the deviation from the mean of each of them. So before you can do that, you need to find out the mean. So the mean, in this case, add up all the numbers and you'll get 62 and divide that by the 12 numbers, and that'll give you 5.16 with the 6 repeating. So then from there I want you to find the deviations of the mean. And when you do the deviations from the mean, you should get these numbers. Negative 3.16 repeating is how far 2 is away from the mean. Negative 2.16 repeating, and that all goes all the way down. Then once you get above the mean, it's 0.83 repeating, and then 1.83 repeating, just the 3's repeating, and so on. So that's this portion of the formula. So that's the deviations from the mean. The next step is we want to square each of these numbers. So go into your calculator and square these numbers. So after you square each of these numbers, which you should get these, that's this portion of the formula. So we've found the deviation of the mean and then squared it. Now we're going to do with this funky thing. This is called the summation. You won't really have to figure out what this is, but just as a note, that's what this is. And all it means is take all these numbers and add them all together. So add all these numbers together and see what you get, which comes out to 59.6 repeating. So that was the summation part. Now we have to divide all that by n minus 1. N minus 1 is the number of numbers we have minus 1. So there's 12 numbers here, so we're going to divide by 11. So this number divided by 11. So 59.6 repeating divided by 11 is 5.42 repeating. Then we're going to take the square root of that number. We've got everything under the square root now. Now we take the square root of the number. And that's not going to come out exactly or a repeating number. What you want to do there is round to the nearest hundredth. I'll tell you in the directions what I want you to round to. In this case, I want you to round to the nearest hundredth. So 2.329, but we want to the nearest hundredth. That's 2 decimal places. So we get rid of the 9 and the 2, and we round up to 2.33. So the standard deviation is 2.33. So that means the mean is 5.16 repeating. So the standard deviation from that is 5.16. So you can see it go down by 2.33 or up by 2.33, and that's where most of your data will lie. So you can kind of see that 4 would still be in the standard deviation, 3 would still be in the standard deviation, 2 wouldn't, 5 would still be, 6 would still be, 7 would still be, but 8 and 10 wouldn't be. So we'd only have 3 numbers outside of the standard deviation. So that's how you calculate it. You don't really have to worry about this unless you find it helpful. Put all the numbers in order, Find the deviation from the mean of all of them, square all the deviations, add them all up, divide by 1 less than the number of them, and then take the square root of them. I suggest writing this down in whatever manner helps you remember it the most, but it's this process every time. I think this is one of the more difficult ones because we have repeating decimals, but the steps are always the same. Alright, now time for the sponge. Find the standard deviation of the set of numbers, round to the nearest hundredth. So we have these numbers 23, 5, 7, 6, 19, 12, 7, 9, 8, 6. Put them in order and then do the steps that I just taught you in order to calculate the standard deviation. That's it for the lesson. Once again, please take notes on the entire lesson. Attempt the sponge. It's not all that bad. It really isn't. And you might get a bonus point on the next test. Submit it all to eBackpack, and have a good night.